This is Ticker. Now, here's Ahron Young.
When you're running a big company, it's hard to lose sight of what is working and what is not. Sometimes it's pretty easy as well how your customers are behaving. Anecdote's a world leader in the use of storytelling in business, pioneering the sector since 2004. They've been working with IBM, Shell, BHP Billiton, just to name a few as well. Shawn Callahan is the founder of Anecdote and joins me now. Thanks so much for your time.
Pleasure.
So what do you guys actually do?
We really focus on helping leaders and sellers find oral stories that they tell to make their point. And this is regardless of what type of organisation they are. It's about just turning it around and actually having oral stories to tell.
So what sort of stories?
Well, they're nearly always stories that will actually help make a point. So it's not like you're just telling stories like you would down the cafe, for example. It might be you might want to make a point about persistence, and so you might tell the James Dyson story about how he came up with his vacuum cleaner and sort of say, look, that guy did 5,000 prototypes, and that's persistence. Look at where he is now. So it's sort of to try to create a story so that people are pulling in the idea and they get the thought and they go, yep, I understand.
What sort of businesses do you guys help?
Usually large corporations. We deliver our programs now in 26 countries, in 11 different languages, and it runs from companies like Accenture or Danone, IBM, Shell. I mean, there's a whole range of different businesses that are looking to new ways for their leaders to engage their employees.
And so where would you say you got this actual idea from? Where did it come from?
Actually, it was when I was at IBM. I had a job there really helping with culture change, and I would go into organisations and collect hundreds, sometimes thousands of stories, and then help them work out what the patterns of behaviour were in their business based on the stories. And then we would decide which interventions we used to shift their culture. And then what that did for me is it made me understood what sort of stories people actually tell in an organisation.
Mm-hmm. And what were they telling?
They're small stories, right? Like, for example, it could be as simple as someone saying, hey, I went around to my boss's office the other day and he was typing away on his computer, and as soon as he saw me, he stopped what he was doing, sat down at the table and engaged me like I was the most important thing. That could be a small story.
It seems really so simple, right?
It does.
And yet for so many companies, for so many businesses,
yep,
it seems impossible.
Yeah.
Why?
I think it's because they don't really know what a story is. So that's the big problem. A number of times where people have said to me, CEOs and all sorts of leaders, they'd say, oh, I've got a great story. Our story, Ahron, is persistence and integrity. That's our story. Mm-hmm. Does that sound like a story to you?
No, because you've got to tell me the details or an example of it.
Indeed.
Right.
But unfortunately the word is bandied around so much.
Are we just not good at it as Australians? Is that the problem? I mean,
No.
I think of some of the really good storytellers. I think of, say, Richard Branson. I think of Bob Iger at Disney, who is a wonderful communicator. And the role of a CEO, you would imagine, is to be a great communicator as well as someone who can get rid of people when they have to. Do you think that these days too many managers think of the latter part and not the first part, and is it an Australia-specific issue?
No, it's not. I mean, I saw a great example of storytelling just this week where a senior leader in a government agency was on a panel, and each time he was asked a question, he answered with a story. Right? He told the story of essentially what Kevin Rudd had done in bringing a particular policy. And then he told a story about the tent city in the middle of the city there in Sydney. And it was just a habit for him. But all the other panel members didn't tell any stories. And he stood out as someone who was a clear communicator. I think what happens is in business we've learnt not to tell stories. Like as soon as you put people around a formal environment, all the stories disappear. The best leaders, though, are the ones who provide an example. Here's my point, here's an example. And I guess that's the differentiator. You hear Australians are great storytellers in the informal environment, right? Mm-hmm. Just as anyone. All Australia, everyone, every human. It is such a human trait. We're all storytellers.
Show us the book.
Oh, yeah, well, I have... this came out a couple of years ago.
Camera 2, show us the book.
Okay, show us
Hold it up.
So, putting stories to work, that was... it really takes people through a process for finding their own stories, honing them, getting just used to.
So you're writing a story about stories. Was this kind of like an inception moment for you, that you were in a dream within a dream within a dream? I mean, is it hard to explain to people how to tell their best story when you don't know what that is from the outset?
Yeah, and so many people will actually say, I have no stories. So you have to just get them to tell.
What do you
a
mean
story.
you have no stories?
I know, it's crazy, right? I've had this happen. They say they got nothing, and then I said, so what did you do on the weekend? And they go, actually, I went over to my daughter's house, and they start to tell this story. And I go, right, that's a story. What would be a point that comes from that story? And they pull out a point. But you've got to translate this into business stories, right? They're family stories. But once they get the idea, they can start to see where those business stories are.
Absolutely. Shawn, thank you so much for your time. Appreciate your time today.
Pleasure.
And of course, more interviews just like this on tickertv.com.au. I'm Ahron Young. Thanks so much for your time.
Subscribe to Ticker for more great stories.